right, Chad, thank you for joining the show today.
Absolutely, man. It's a pleasure to be here. And like we said, we are having a blast and the coffee, sorry, not coffee. Coffee is starting to kick in here, guys.
Yeah, and on my side, I actually don't drink coffee. People will be surprised. I actually have never had coffee in my entire life, which I get yelled at a lot for. But like, it's. I hear good things about it at least.
It's a great thing, and it's going to sound really weird. Some people are like, "Hey, I don't want it." Some people, I want it. But if you look at the story that we're going to give you guys, you notice there's a little pattern of I get attracted, not say attracted, but like I need some sort of stimulant in my life,
Hmm.
and certain people, coffee calms them down. To me, it's like, let's go. Like that's my Adderall when it comes to that stuff.
Ooh, okay.
And to me, it sounds really weird, but like I operate the best at like 6 to 12 cups, which is probably not a good healthy thing.
Wow,
But
6 to 12. Oh my gosh.
so yeah, it's
Is that? I guess is that a lot? I mean, I feel like I have no idea. I mean, I feel like I think I hear people have like, oh, I have like two or three a day. So is that like a lot, or is that like not a lot?
um it's technically, so I have a small brew. I bought a small brewer just to kind of stay away from this, but I end up double brewing, which I should go back and get one of those cheap $10 big ones. But in general, what it was is for me, coffee is like my go juice. Is the best, the run and joke with it. But I operate so more efficiently when I have coffee in my system that it's something that I don't want to call it a drug. It's not that, but it's something that needs that. Just my brain just is such in a creative flow when I'm on that much coffee.
I like it. Awesome. Well, before we get started, let me introduce you real quickly to the audience today, and we'll go through it. And I know there's a good story behind that. So, everyone, Chad Smith. Chad is the host of the worldwide podcast called the Battle Warrior Podcast. He is the CEO of Battle Warrior Brands, a national-based apparel company that promotes the beauty of mental health through this nation. He is the author of Battle Warrior, the inspiring story of Chad Smith, a dyslexic survivor of addictions, 3 times international best-selling author. 1 was solo and 2 was collaborative in nature. Chad is a recovered addict from alcohol and pornography and currently is 3 years sober. His mission is to provide new information to strive for phenomenal life through physical, mental, and spiritual mindsets. Change, create, lead is a lot of what Chad believes. So, Chad, again, appreciate you joining the show. Love a lot there. I think there's a lot to unpack just from that very, very short intro.
It's so many layers when we look at this stuff, it's going to sound really weird how I word it this way here, guys. But like, I'm going to be 37 in March, and there's so much life that occurred from like 13 to 37. To some people, be like, okay, that's not a typical life, whatever. But in general, there's so many layers to it. But when you look at someone like me to say to you, I'm so humble and so just down to earth, it's like, yeah, okay, I did that. And it's not that. It's just, in the process, when we start overcoming things, you look at so much focus on just trying to do better each day. And mind you, some days are good, some days are bad. And I don't want to sound like a, motivational speaker when it comes to that stuff. But to me, there's so much root of a blue collar in me that growing up, I would have my parents do shift work at the mill. My mom would do like the 7 to 3s at the local mill. Uncle owned a business around the construction industry. So it's like, for me, it's the running, not say the running joke, but like I look at myself as the person each day that still takes that lunchbox to work.
Just
So
yeah.
like, just get to work, buddy. Just get to work. And so, but yeah, like I said, there's so many layers when it comes to this stuff with my story that um now looking back at it, it's like, yeah, okay, I had a whole different life growing up.
100%. And I love that. It sounds very like a humble beginning, just very humble beginnings and kind of growing from there, going through the challenges and things that most people probably at this age haven't necessarily gone through. So I kind of want to get started around that journey and kind of give us a brief, overview of kind of how, you created the apparel company, you're a best-selling author, you're a recovering addict. Like, so, I mean, let's break down the layers a little bit and kind of go through. So what is your journey?
Okay, so starting, it's going to start at about 9 years old here, guys, but a little bit earlier than that. But like, my parents got divorced when I was 2, 3 years old. I think they were in the court system when I was 2 or 3. Ended up being, so like, my real father only wanted one child, and he had two, which means I was the youngest. And growing up, the stories I just hear more on my mom's side, but my mom wanted 2 kids. and he won and won. And when he got my sister, which we're both, you know, still great to this day, but he did not want me. So I was that add-on child is the best way of saying it. So like, you know, I have to go pick up, you know, my daughter. Why do I have to get him? Because he's hyperactive. I don't want to deal with him. So it was a lot of like the father abandonment growing up, but I got very lucky on a lot of things of having a phenomenal stepdad that pulled both my sister and me underneath his wing when we were 3. I think they got married at 5, but he was in our life from like my 3 years old for me. So 35 years ish, somewhere in there. But the cool thing about it is there's a lot of great things about it. Like you learn what he learns, you know, the repeated patterns. So like, you know, construction, he grew up on a farm, just that old school, like I was talking about, that hard-nosed dude, like shut your mouth, just get to work, go take care of work, you know, come back. And I noticed, you know, between my real father and him that the work ethic was insane. So like my dad worked 364 days a year, maybe took 1 day a year off, and it was always like 12-hour shifts, all that stuff.
Man.
And then my stepdad would always, you know, he would work his 40 or 50 during the week, but then on the weekends, he was always building something in the garage, constructing something. So there's a lot of, even though it wasn't quite creativeness, but there's always doing. And that's the typical blue collar thing of just doing. But with that, learning those skills, you know, growing up, the more mature I got, a lot of those skills back in the day, you know, Ed Mylett says it's straight great. Like the child doesn't learn by doing, the child learns by seeing. And, you know, with him, not him in general, but like that side of the family, you know, growing up, my parents would go out Friday night fish here in the upper Midwest, which is a normal thing. So I was always in the bars at 2, 3, 4 years old, just running behind the bars, grabbing quarters, come back out, jumping on games, just that normal environment of the entertainment. And I don't want to say like my alcoholism wasn't their fault. It wasn't like, I'm gonna tell everyone straight out, it wasn't my parents' fault. It was things that I was taught / by seeing would thought would be cool. So like I molded into having a drink in my hand at 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, 13 years old, drinking every weekend on the, you know, at the campgrounds. And the theory of it was, which I can look at it now as a parent and say, okay, hey, your child's not going anywhere. He's not driving anything. He's not causing any trouble. Go ahead. Like you're under controlled, you know, I'm an air quote controlled environment. Well, that pattern just kept going and going and going. And the thing about it is, you know, when I was in high school, you know, all the kids would come over to my place and parents would take the keys. We would go do whatever we need to do. We'd, you know, drink, smoke cigars, and just typical high school stuff. But what happened in high school is when everyone would kind of leave for sports, I would do sports, but then on the weekends, I would do tournament fishing. So I was already on the road with guys 10, 15 years older than me, going to different towns, staying at cheap hotels, you know, learning road life that at 17, 18 years old. So when I turned 18 years old, I was already, instead of doing locally, is what I would say, like statewide stuff, I went nationally. So I was traveling to Michigan. I was traveling to Canada. I was traveling to Illinois, and regionally, locally, whatever it is, on the national base trail doing the #1 championship. So I would qualify for the championship, you know, at 18 years old, go figure out what the lights, the action, the old fun, you know, the fun behind the road life. And with that, you also learn that, you know, if you have a blow day is the best way we call it. But like if you're on the Great Lakes and it's too windy, they would call it a blow day. So you would go to the hotel and you would party, honestly. And what ended up happening, you know, I went to Michigan and had some great friends that were there. And what ended up happening is I didn't know one of the friends were kind of loosey goosey with his personal life, and he was. So I ended up being, you know, me and him went out to the restaurant, and ended up I got the girls' phone numbers, whatever the girls came back, and here I'm sitting there thinking who was my friend at 18, 19 years old. He was, I think, 40 at the time. Ended up sleeping on his wife. So like at an early age, I saw this pattern of like people sleeping, lives getting destroyed being on the road. And to me, it just seemed normal because you pull in a town, you do tournament, you know, people are like, oh my God, you know, you're at this level, whatever it is. And you see the trucks, you see the boats, you see the new stuff, new equipment, and people think you're rock stars versus was, seeing the, terrible road life or the terrible family life. So for me, I rolled into college already hitting the road for a couple of years. And to me, like, the party never stopped. So like I would go to college and be like, okay, I don't want to be in this class. I want to learn business so I can go back and be with my friends
and do better. Yeah. So
yeah. And so for me, I would take all my pain out at college with alcohol. So I didn't learn. The thing about it is I learned visually. I learned visually through audio, but I didn't know at the time is you stick a book in my face, I could not comprehend it. There's only 2 books I think I can comprehend in my life on top of my mind, and that's Rich Dad Poor Dad.
Great
because
book.
of the picture. Yeah. Oh, dude, it's a phenomenal book. But like the pictures of like the arrows going through the cash flow statements.
Yeah.
That's how I learned. And not, in college where it's you take a book, you memorize it in the which is dumb. We can sit here and rip on college a little bit, but and then come Friday they take a test on it. And I'm like, what the hell did we just talk about? And he's like, didn't you pay attention? I say, yeah, I read it. It's like, did you get it? I'm like, no. And ended up being I got kicked out my first semester because
wow,
I drank a lot and I couldn't comprehend work.
And you were at Michigan?
I'm in Wisconsin, but it's the same thing. Yep.
Gotcha.
So ended up being I got diagnosed with, which I knew I had, but ADHD. But I see the thing with dyslexia, they don't test for it. And it's kind of like you learn from it as you go. So like you get a lot of people my age, which is 30, mid 30s. We never tested it. We tested for ADHD, but we never tested that back in the day.
So it's so interesting you say that because I think it really depends on the environment you grow up in, because I actually have dyslexia as well. And so I'm not sure they tested for dyslexia, but all they excuse me, they could see that I was having trouble reading early on, like probably early elementary school, and they started testing me, and so I had to be on like my own kind of plan in school for probably 4 or 5 years until I was able to kind of catch up and do and get better at reading. I still have trouble, but like it's definitely something they I'm not sure. I don't know how you would test for it exactly. I just know that like I was at a bunch of doctors when I was a kid, and they were like going through like, oh yeah, you have this, like, and so I feel you for the dyslexia, because you read something and you're like, what? Like I don't understand what I'm reading here. Like and then I jumbled up letters and I'm like, wait, that's right. Or you look, sometimes for me, I can look at a word like battle on the background there. For those of you who can't see, he's got a sign up behind, but and I'll look at it and go, that's not right. Like something about that's not right. And I can't, I go, what is that saying? And it'll snap back out of it after a second or two, but you'll be like, what is that word? So I empathize a lot with that, because I've gone through the whole, dyslexia and not being able to understand things.
And the funny thing about it is you could steer your way through high school and in tech. So like for me, when I was in high school, I always knew I was going to the tech. So I'm like, why do I need all this accelerated classes? Because I'm going to the tech, because I just wanted, at the time, I just wanted a 2-year degree to get out. Because school for me, the entrepreneurship journey is actually a lot more efficient for me because it's hands-on. And it sounds really weird to say it this way, but like there's so many moving parts and everything. But deep down, guys, it's hands-on stuff, which means you're creating something, you're figuring out a way to go public with it. There's a lot of BS in between of just systems and all that stuff. But the cool thing about it is you don't need to know anything. Now, not say you don't need to know anything. You need to know what makes you dangerous. Mm-hmm. But then you can hire people to kind of, or subcontract, whatever it is, for certain things that you're terrible at. In college, they wanted you to know everything in every class, and they're like, "This is being," and I blatantly, I told a few teachers off because when I was on Adderall, I was not a complete beast, but every day in college, it was just terrible because I'm like, I just want to run a business. I just want to run a business. So I would go to teachers and be like, okay, what are you teaching me? They're like this. They're like, well, you got to learn this because you're going to be an employee. I'm like, yeah, I know I'm going to be an employee, but who runs a business here? And it clicked in college because I had a science teacher that he told us blatantly straight out that I cannot teach here next year because I don't have my master's. And he's like, I'm probably one of the best salmon research teachers in the state because he did a lot of stuff for the state work. Physically on his own, just going in and shocking the fish to kind of do tagging and stuff. So he's like, I have tons of years of that underneath. He was the coolest down to earth guy. And he's like, I do construction work outside of school, but he's like, I cannot teach here next year because they're putting a kibosh. And he's like, you're going to get a teacher that probably never has done this before.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why am I here?
Experience. I mean, it's the whole thing. It's like, oh, you need to have this degree. Otherwise, it's like, well, I mean, so why 20 years of experience actually doing it is less important than someone has theoretical knowledge of what we're doing. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's academia. That's a lot of it.
Yeah. And the thing about it is the more I went into it, the more I just kind of buried myself in drinking, because I'm sitting there looking at that. I'm sitting there looking at my friends who at 19, 20 years old at the time was making 60, 70 grand a year on his parents' farm. Not a good or bad. It's just the pattern he had. He had a different route. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, why am I so pissed off and mad? And ended up doing is at the beginning, during the process, I got so mad. I'm like, I'm going to just max out all my student loans and go figure out a way to get out of here. Well, I kind of learned you do not want to spend money. At that time, it was 2006, 2007. I did have some extra cash. So I did, trade stocks a little bit in college, while in college, but I physically never learned okay, this is an expense. This is this. Because growing up, like my family didn't really pay attention to money because my mom left that. So like my dad's very, not say financially secure. He's very tight. My real father. So like she got so sick of it. There was so much trauma behind it that she's like, I'm not going to teach my kids the financial knowledge. She's like, just balance a checkbook, make sure your bills are clear, and just put a little bit away, but it wasn't a lot of like the rich dad poor dad where it's like, okay, this goes here, this flows through here, this.
Yeah.
And that's how I learned best. It's like this. So someone showed me once.
Visible learning, doing kind of, learning.
Yep.
Yeah.
So at that time I left college with 6 digits worth of student loans.
Oh, phenomenal. Good.
Yeah, we learned. And which guys don't do. If you're going to do it, buy an asset with it so I can at least refi it. But I'm just going to laugh at that. But in general, here I met my first wife at the time carrying 6 digits worth of stuff, hitting the road in your 20s. And honestly, guys, now being in my mid 30s, I'm sitting there looking at it. I'm like, I have no clue what the hell I was doing in my 20s. No one does. You hit the road fresh out of college. You don't know what you're good at. You don't know what you're stick at. That 20s are meant for you to fall on your face and figure out what skills you need to learn. It's a skill gathering, group. And I was out there gathering skills, getting new friends, figuring out ways to kind of pay that way off. Ended up learning my first route of a 1099 issue. So like, signed a contract, got a lot of money. And then they're like, oh, hey, you're 1099. You need to pay this back. Well, we'll take you to court. So it's a lot of like school hard knock stuff I learned. And during the process of that, she wasn't working full time for a while. So we were on one income, shelling out, like $600-700 a month in student loan payments on top of rent and all that stuff. And we were stressed out. And we got married. She wanted to have kids because she wanted the normal life. And I'm air quoted, but everyone knows what that is. And, so she would be like, I can't get pregnant because we're stressed out. So we went on Clomid. And that's where the pornography kind of kept in here, because my mind's like, I need to get this, goals and dreams driven, need to get this. And she's like, hey, we need, this is my week on Clomid. If you guys don't know what Clomid is, it's a fertility drug. And I'm not going to get to it much of the details of what's going on behind it. But, she'd be like, okay, my sessions this week, and my brain wanted something else. And so I, for 3.5 years, we struggled to get pregnant, which thank you, now, but at the time she got so furious, she actually ended up, going out cheating, getting pregnant by her now husband while we were married.
Oof.
So
wow.
With that, there's a lot of trauma of like my dad leaving, a lot of, normal road life growing up. And then also on top of that. So to me, like I said, straight out, like in 20 years of my 20s and teens, I experienced a lot what people that never really would like test something out at. Like if they play a conservative life, they would never experience what I experienced. So like for me, it's always like all or nothing. And go ahead.
No, yeah, I'm just a couple of things I wanted to kind of like hit on because I feel like the audience wants to kind of know, hear more about it. Is obviously didn't work out. The first marriage didn't work out.
Yep.
But how did you, because growing up in a home where your dad leaves, right, and your mom remarries, and no matter who you are, that's a very difficult situation. So obviously you're learning, you're doing things. If you're out on the boat, people are older than you drinking, you're going to be drinking, which causes the cycle of continuous alcohol to be consumed at a young age. It makes a lot of sense. So did you ever, before you got married, or even when you got married and she wanted to have kids, like the trauma of someone leaving when you were young kind of impact the idea of like, did you ever not want kids, or did that ever impact that in any way? Because you had to experience that, and now you're here playing the role of potential dad, and then things are starting to kind of unravel the way it did in the past. Did it ever kind of cross your mind, or how did that work?
At that time, I think I was 27, 28 years old, and absolutely that's correct. And there's a few things that were behind it. So I officially never really accepted my stepdad to like fully open up and love and all that stuff. And me and him, we could go forever now, but I never really accepted that until I got after divorce, because I didn't really notice it until now. I'm like, holy cow, I have a guy that, because at that time, I wasn't seeing counselors or anything to kind of talk about my previous dad. So yes, the short answer that yes, I would look back and I would say, okay, yes, I want to be a dad, but I don't want to be a dad now. So it'd be a two-person battle. It'd be the kid that would grew up and that had his dad that left him, and sitting there going, okay, crap, I gotta be dad now. I hope that doesn't happen. And then secondly, it's, on the other positive side of it is I never had a real true father, by blood. So now how am I going to be a dad to these kids if I never had that true blood? And the thing about it here, guys, like I'm emphasizing blood. They don't have to be blood to really be a dad. But they're just a special connection with something with blood.
Gotcha. So the alcohol, addiction. So you're going, you're in college. I'm assuming at this point you're pretty full blown, like you're drinking every night, whatever it might be. When did you know that was a problem? And did you also have that when you were married? You were still addicted to alcohol?
Yes to both, but the thing where I knew I had a problem in college was, and I don't know how I survived it, but there was, in college you get so egged on, and not say egged on, but like it's such a party vibe behind the scenes that you don't know when you're jacked up, like the way I'm explaining it here. But there was a session when I was 21 years old, 21, 22, somewhere in there. I was still in the dorms, and we actually ended up going through 5 bottles of whiskey in 7 days. And for me, it was
Like a
between
bottle,
three guys,
like a fifth,
like
or like a handle?
like a full 175.
Oh yeah, handle. Okay, wow.
Yeah. And it was my birthday, and what it was is we were ice fishing. And I was hanging with the hockey kids. We went through 2 bottles of Crown in like 6 hours.
Oh,
On top of that full week was also 3 bottles of Canadian Mist. And I don't know how I remember these details still to this day.
Gosh.
But it was a session in 14 or 13 weeks, whatever it was. It was 16 bottles of whiskey in like that whole time frame. And at that time, then I'm like, yeah, okay, we might have a problem here.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
So
Wow.
that came in. Yes, it rolled into my first marriage. She knew I had an issue because she kind of caught me at the time when I was doing all that stuff. And we had a rule in the house: don't put whiskey in the house. And I didn't really have much of it. I was strictly like a beer only type of person because I knew I never had issues with beer at the time. So we kind of monitored that a little bit. I did cut loose when we had weddings and stuff. It was full out, like cut loose, whatever. But so when that trauma occurred for her leaving, I ended up, I lost a lot of weight just because stress, it just wipes you down. And to me, the only thing that my mind knows is something that I knew in the past. I gained a lot of weight in college. I know I'm stressed out. I need to gain that weight back just for the sake of it, because you need to stay alive. So I'm like, I need to gain it back. And the fastest way of doing it was beer and pizza. So like I ate unhealthy for like the first year, drank a lot of
Ouch.
beer, and then found out I had issues with beer. I wonder why. And then switched to Tito's, and Tito's and I get along very well, and ended up at my peak, started drinking the 1 liter. I was 3/8 to one half of a bottle a night, if not more. And at my peak,
Wow.
right before like 2 weeks, I cleaned up. I was 3/8 to a half bottle of 175 a night, and still go to the bars.
That's a lot of alcohol. 3/8 to a half of a handle, which is 1.75
Yep.
liters, 1.75 liters of alcohol, half of that. I mean, that's crazy. Wow. So I guess so you're going through this, right? And I want to give people kind of the inspiring part of this, because it seems like it's, oh my gosh, like how do you realize it's a problem? The first, again, not to make light of anything, obviously, because it's not a fun situation at all, and it's a learning experience. And
Yep.
so the first marriage ends, like you said, and at this point, you have the alcohol addiction, you have the pornography addiction. How do you improve from here? How do you take action in your life to kind of get to a better place? Because I do, and I want to get into kind of what you're doing now, because it's like a complete 180. It's like, so where is that point? You have this like gray area, you have kind of the dark area, you have this gray area, and now you kind of have it seems as though you have a much better
A trajectory area. So for me, the gray area, the in between, was I didn't really. There's multiple checkpoints in my life when I was partying. So like multiple checkpoints of the last couple of years I cleaned up. So there was a few people coming up, like my mother, and a very good spiritual mother, which is not my mother, but she saved me from driving my car off the road at the time when that trauma occurred. So she's like, hey, you need to clean up. I'm like, pardon my French, I don't need to do this dumb, you know what? And, keep going down the road. And 6 months later, she'd be like, you need to clean up. And I'm like, I ain't freaking listen to you. It just, when you're in this mindset, you just don't want to listen to anyone. And then my mom saying, you got to clean up. And I kind of just brushed them off even more, because it's not say sinning's fun, but when you're doing that stuff, it's fun. You don't want to stop doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And then it came to, I got in a conversation with my grandma, and she just chewed my head off. Like literally 5 foot tall grandma just tore me to pieces.
Good for her.
And ended up being, she was bringing up stuff about like, don't you end up like my cousin? Don't you end up like my brother? And here I'm 35 at the time, going, who the hell are you talking about? Because I never heard about those guys. And she just tore into it like, hey, this one, his wife cheated on him, he stayed in the bar. This one, his wife broke up with him. So ended up being, it was like a multiple generational pattern of going, okay, where did this come from?
So you even know it was
nothing.
You didn't know this was in your history, like this was in your family
nothing
history. Wow.
Absolutely nothing. And so it kind of woke me up a little bit. I'm like, and I called my sister, I'm like, granny just like tore me to pieces. And the rule of growing up was don't piss grandma off. Obviously I know why now. At the time, I'm like, and this was a couple months from the end, and I just kept going and going and going, and ended up trying to see a girl at the time, which was at the time way ahead of my perception of someone I wanted to date. Someone that was like very smart, very, like a healthcare person, very beautiful in person. From the outside, everything looked like perfect, like a very good, cleaned up, got her stuff together type. So I was very proud of it. But on the other end of it, I still wanted to carry that partying of it, and ended up, I bought a one for a Friday night, woke up the next morning, and she's like, who drank the whole bottle? And I'm like, what? And it was seriously like half an inch at the bottom. She's like, someone drank the whole bottle. And I'm like, I thought you had a few. And she's like, no, I only had one. I was just drinking whatever. I think we were doing meals at the time, whatever the mix was. And that kind of like woke me up a little bit. I'm like, wait a minute here, something ain't right. And then a couple of weeks later, this was at the decline of like my grandpa passing away, but we had one last gathering, a family gathering, and this is where I cleaned up. So like I brought the bottle, dropped it on the counter, and at that time I had about 14, 15 people give me the deer in the headlights look. Cause I'm like, hey, I'm gonna just do this tonight. We're gonna, I'll throw the bottle away at your guys' house. And I had I think it was a half of 175, whatever situation, or 3/8, whatever it was. And my uncle's like, dude, that's a week's worth of stuff. I'm like, yeah, I'll be gone tonight. Just kind of like nonchalantly doing it. And they all turned to my mom. My mom shook her head. She's like, yeah, I'll be gone tonight. And at that moment, that's when I knew I messed up and caused some situation, a little ruffle, little ripple in my family. And next morning, I had a message from one of my family members saying, dude, if you ever do, there's certain things behind the scenes that the exact reason why it made me switch. But she's like, if you ever do that again, I'm going to disown you. So like there was some ripple effect stuff that occurred. And after that, I drove home with one headlight out. I wanted to fix it so I can go to the bars, and ended up passing out in my house. And at the time I was still living with my parents because I wasn't trying to, you're divorced, you're free, you want to just do dumb stuff. And so my life completely, like at that moment, I'm done. And it was Halloween 2019. I made it 30 days. I relapsed. I had 2 shots and 2 beers because I had like the most deer hunting successful week of my whole life. I had a nice one I could put on the wall. It just, everything was perfect. And that was kind of like the last hoorah. So my official clean date is Thanksgiving 2019, like that time frame. And I haven't looked back. It's been, the battle's been insane in the thing with the battle, and especially like behind me, there's a lot of warrior things that are themed throughout, life and groups and all that stuff. And to me, when I just remember the name meaning. So like people look up your name. What's your name meaning? What's your name meaning? And it just never really clicked until I'm like, what's naming in a Chad? And there's 2 definitions. One says battle and the other one says warrior. And I'm like, what? And I thought on it, and then all it is guys, I just took them 2 together. Like, I'm gonna keep it simple as possible. I took 2 things together and added the brands at the end. But the thing that caused it to click was like, I looked up, I'm like, what is this? And I'm gonna get a little spiritual here for 2 seconds here, but the verse that popped up when I looked that up was Spirit of God, or the armor of God, which means put your armor on, go to work, and kind of go against everything that's going against you. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, that's so me, like just the journey and the verse and everything. So it just stuck to me. And there's a theme of perseverance of that just keeps, showing up. And what's actually ended up happening with this apparel line is, I'm creating stuff that I seem good, but then I have oops designs like the You Are More that are on, and I'm not going to get too, into the products, but I have a t-shirt that says You Are More, and I'm like, this is kind of like a joke design, whatever. It's like, I don't like it. Ended up being whatever it is. It's a marketing 101 thing.
Well, real quickly, just because I do want to get into this, but just want to bridge the gap there.
Yep.
So you went clean,
Yep.
and that's when the apparel company. That's when you battle war. You put the Chad meaning together. So at that point, though, how did you come up with like why this? Why an apparel company? How did you kind of come up with doing that? In the meantime, I'm assuming starting in 2019, right? When you started to become sober, this was when this kind of inspiration came up. How did that happen?
Actually, the podcast came first. The podcast came during lockdown, which was 2020. So I sobered up in 19 here in Wisconsin. We locked down in March 2020.
And what's the podcast? What specifically? So the audience knows what's the podcast about.
So the podcast is called Battle Warrior Podcast. It was specifically created at the beginning, was called C's Get Degrees, going from ordinary to extraordinary, which is the process of it. Dude, it's a catchy title at the time.
Yeah. Okay. I like that.
And it talked about like my journey of going to average and trying to flip my life around. And ended up being, it was great for what it was. For the title and stuff. And then I rebranded everything to Battle Warrior Podcast about 1.5 years ago. And with that came the apparel. And also at the time I had a fitness supplement company I was trying to get started. And ended up being, when I'm at shows, everyone wanted the apparel. Not against fitness stuff. Like I love my fitness industry stuff, but it just whatever was, like the arrows were always pointing to the apparel. And I'm like, you know what? Screw that. learn the supplements as a failure, but a failure of education. And I'm going to get rid of the failure, and then I'm going to focus on the apparel. And to me, it's more of like a natural direction, because with the apparel, I was always, when I was doing tournament fishing, I would always be designing my t-shirts with the company. So like the companies be like, here's our shirt. How do you want it to do? And I would be 1, 2, 3, 4, like literally visually designing it to make it edgy, a little bit of arrogance at times. Just it's I call it the Ric Flair effect. So like I mix a little Ric Flair with like my Metallica metal background and just make it like a very good presentable product where people can catch it. And so to me with the apparel, it was just more of like a natural fit, because I was already doing that in college and in my teens. And not saying it's an easy way, because it's not an easy way. It's just, it's so much more on my creative side.
I love that. So you create the brand, you create Battle Warrior. What is because I know it's not just, a regular apparel brand. I mean, there's a specific meaning behind it. So how did you kind of incorporate your journey into the brand? And then, we'll start with that.
So what I wanted to highlight was the people that got roughed up. And I'm gonna say roughed up. So like my journey, where you get thrown in the mixer, spit up, tossed up, and then you come back out with a different product. So I wanted to highlight the positivity, I would say the mental health, but I don't want to use the generic term of the mental health, because that's such a generic term, but I wanted to highlight the perseverance of going from someone that barely had anything in their life, and now he builds the whole journey up to the process where he's going right now. I wanted to look at myself and look back at someone in his teens or 20s and say, okay, dude, let's lay it out properly. Let's do it the right way. Let's build it, and say, okay, hey, even though you had that background, you never had that access or any self-help, all that stuff, I'm going to simplify it down and take someone like you and say, okay, hey, dude, put the shirt on, put whatever. And I'm not going to be a big time salesy here guy, but put this on and realize that you're on a positive journey of getting better, or vice versa. You went through something. So like when you're in the public, you can be like, okay, hey, I'm wearing this because my journey involved some sort of trauma, but yet I'm helping people in the community.
I love that. And I think it's amazing too. I mean, like just the self-improvement journey going from, just to recap the whole story, but to really come out the other end with that clear alcohol issue. And really kind of making a brand about that self-improvement journey, I think is great. I mean, I think a lot of people, and I think one of the things I took away from that the most is that you don't necessarily need a specific traumatic event, right? Like you don't need, we build habits. Like the alcoholism that you had, it didn't come from like a specific event. It kind of just developed over time. It just kind of happened. Obviously there are things that happened in your life. Whereas some people think, oh, you have to have this one thing that happens and you could, but like really you're in a bad situation, you're in a bad environment. Yeah, some things happen, but nothing like, specifically, obviously the divorce, when your dad leaving as a kid is obviously very traumatic, generally speaking. But I think just kind of, for 20 years, just having, being around older people, going out, no one really telling you, and then it's just building that and then being able to stop that habit, because that's a lot of what I talk about, is being able to figure out, okay, how do I make progress in my life in some way, shape, or form? And because we develop habits over time based on how we are raised, based on us being younger, based on the beliefs that we had. And so with tournament fishing, I imagine you guys drink all the time. I imagine that like,
absolutely.
You're like, what, 15 when you were doing with the older guys?
13, I started my first ones.
I mean, it's crazy to me. So, I mean, you have all these habits, and then you finally, because not a lot of people would make the change. A lot of people would just keep doing it, and now they're in their 40s, 50s, 60s. They've repeated the exact things that you went through as a kid, and you kind of made a stop. You're 4 years sober at this point, depending on the dates and all that stuff. And I think it's really incredible that, like, it's people can stop bad habits. People can turn and make progress towards. And I know, like, you have a long way to go. You have high aspirations of where you want to go, and I think that's just a very inspiring story. So people, when the takeaway really is just like, it doesn't have to be this like ridiculous horrific tragedy, or it's just an accumulation of little things over and over that build this massive avalanche in someone's life. And the self-improvement journey it's just one step at a time. It's very much, okay, how do I make progress? How do I wake up today and make progress towards whatever the goal is? And yours is obviously, and obviously you created some books along the way, so I want to get into real quickly as well.
Yep.
But I just think it's incredible to go through that and come out the other end, like just, I'm going to make this company and kind of and help people who are struggling as well.
Yeah, and there's a couple ways to approach it. So like how you explained it, of how everything just kind of piles up, it's actually quite parallel, because that same story is how you dig yourself out of the hole. So you climb back up, you slide back on, whatever. We'll make it simple. So like for me, in my mind is, I knew I was addicted to something. I'm addicting personality, which means that's just me. So for me, I'm looking at it saying, okay, if I'm all in on drinking and I don't stop, which means let's refocus that drive and say, okay, how do I do this? All right, I want to be all in on business or personal development, whatever it is. So I took that same filter or that same sight and turned it to say, okay, instead of doing how am I doing it, how am I going to get out of it? And I built it up by one win at another and another. And the thing with battle and addiction, I'm saying it's a continuous battle. I'm doing very well right now, but there's also times, and I don't want to get too arrogant with that battle and kind of, shake the house a little bit, because I can slip up in 2 seconds. That's the reality of it. But I had to strip everything down. I had to stay out of the bars for like a year and a half. I had to figure out, okay, I'm addicted to this. So how do I get something out of my hands? Which means I started my eBay and I started my podcast, whatever. And at that time with lockdown, how do I seek information? Because the information all I had with lockdown is you can't physically meet up. So it was podcasting, it was YouTube, it was all that stuff. And, it was friends that got me into podcasting, because they're like, hey, I want you to record your stories, because obviously you have a lot of life that was involved with that. And then ended up being, he's like, dude, you're a perfect host. Why don't you host your own? So it was a little tiny stack of the wins going up. And in this podcast journey, you can attest to this, but like you meet people that are so amazing that they had so much trauma in their past. And they're like, dude, let me know if you need anything. And that's one thing I love about the podcast community in general, like self-help, whatever, the whole bubble that we're in, because everyone is so positive. And I don't want to sound like too, yoga cheesy here, but everyone wants to help everyone out because they know what the dark side is. So you're around people that write books. They're like, all right, let's write a book. This is how you do it. Let's start Shopify, whatever it is. This is how you do it. This is people you contact. And you're finally in that self-improvement, self-development world that I was craving my whole life.
I love that. So where'd the books come in? When did the books come into play? And then, I mean, did you ever envision you would be a best-selling author? Like, how did that?
No, I have not. I'm actually working on my number 2 one right now, but the number 1, it was actually quite funny, because I had a few friends that came out and they became number 1 and all that stuff. And she's like, I just wrote a book. How is it? I'm like, she's awesome. And then, we started recording podcasts. We hosted a coffee show together, and she's actually my co-host for an event I have coming up here too. But, we developed a great friendship, and she's like, yo, like, bro, stop. Like, your history can make a book, if not more. Write a book. And I'm like, yeah, right. I don't want to write a freaking book. And she's like, just shut up. We'll record a couple podcasts. You convert it. And she's a tough love, 5 foot, kind of like my grandma. And
gosh, yeah.
Yeah, like Filipino girl, amazing individual. And her husband's like a huge 6'6" prison card. So they both can whoop my ass. And sorry about that, the language there. But in general, she's like, sit down, write one down. And I just started spitting out stuff for a podcast. And at the time I was doing mental health class, so I had a journal already set up. And it was just like a perfect storm of just kind of getting that first book situated. And, obviously, yeah, I had to protect some people. So, you don't want to tear the house apart too much. So I throttled back a little bit, but it's still a heavy, gnarly, like gritty book. And, this next one, we're going to feature more of like the personal. That one was featuring more of my faith walk, scripture and stuff I used to kind of get out of it. Now I'm going to look at the process of it. So like, this is what occurred, and now this is what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. I love that. So best, that's awesome. So real quickly here, so where can people find you, including the book and everything?
All right. So the best ways of finding me here, guys, is battlewarriorbrands.com, battle-warrior-brands.com. And then Battle Warrior Podcast is actually battle-warrior.podcast.com. So the same thing except for podcast. And you can get the book on Amazon here, guys. If not, pay attention. The best thing to do is I got email lists for both those websites. So, go visit them, go put your email in, and that'll keep you updated on all the information we got going on. On Facebook and Instagram, it's at the Chad M. Smith. And with that, you're going to see a lot of events coming up, especially like my summit and all that fun stuff that's we're going to be doing here. So yeah, I'm pretty active on my Instagram. And then I'm also pretty active on my clothing brand. And yeah, so I had to shut down one website just because it was on the bottom of the totem pole. And I'm like, I have limited time to begin with right now. So we're focusing both on the apparel and the podcast website.
I love that. And all that will be in the show notes, so people can just click on it from the show notes. So just feel free. I'll have all the links registered below. Real quickly, I have two more questions actually, but one is, where do you see the brand going? Whether it's the book or there's the apparel, but where do you what's the goal like 5 years from now?
So there where I see myself going, honestly, is it's going to be a dual purpose thing. So to me, it's going to be obviously speaking gigs and stuff's going to be evolved around that, but I think it's going to be a heavy personal development mixed with the apparel, just because it's such a complete circle. So people that are looking in the apparel also do personal development, and it sounds really weird to say it that way, but it's going to be a complete circle when it comes to that stuff. I will be bringing these shows on YouTube, so you're going to be bringing a lot of this newer stuff on YouTube. But in general, it's going to be more of a encompass, which means a couple different areas meshed into one big thing. Books are never going to end. I have a theme in my first page in my first book where it says, this is for the people that said the teachers said that they would never meet anything in their life, and here they're a best-selling author. So I have a little, punch at the beginning of the first book, but in general, that's never going to end. The process is probably going to get a lot easier, just because the more you do it, the more you're going to get better at it. And then apparel is never going to end, unless someone comes and buys it. We'll just say it that way. But continuous growth, continuous involvement, trying to expand my creativity and try to expand my brain more.
I love it. Any final thoughts for the audience,
guys? And we're going to tagline on the tagline I actually use, which is change, create, lead. In order to change your life, guys, you have to physically change something. And in order to create a new life, you have to create something new, which means create a new skill, knowledge, mindset, whatever, and then lead. So before you can lead your community, guys, you have to do those two steps before you can lead anyone. So that's the way I look at it, and that's what I'm actually keeping close to my heart now on.
I love it. Chad, thank you so much for the time and the story, and basically this journey of self-improvement, step by step, bottle by bottle. I mean, just unbelievable to hear, and kind of and I'm obviously I would love to get a follow-up in a couple of years to see where everything's at, because I mean, success is great, and I love it. Love the self-improvement. So I appreciate the time and I appreciate the story.
Absolutely, man. Thank you very much. I'm glad to be on here. And guys, before he hits pause on the pause recording, go visit his podcast, go visit ours, whatever it is, go download it, go tell us how we can do good today, and tell us how great we are doing, whatever. Just go download it and tell us how we can improve ourselves.
I love it. Thank you so much for the time.